What you are watching unfold right now is not just another Middle East conflict. It is the visible surface of something far deeper, far more calculated, and far more dangerous than anything the mainstream narrative is willing to fully explain to you. The world is being reorganized. Power is shifting. And what Israel is doing inside Iran right now is not simply about nuclear facilities or missile sites. It is about cutting the threads of a web that connects Moscow to Tehran to Pyongyang, a web that has been quietly built over years while most Americans were looking elsewhere. Think about that for a moment. 3 separate countries, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Both Iran and North Korea are treaty partners of Russia, with North Korea concluding its comprehensive strategic partnership in June 2024, and Iran concluding its version with Russia in January 2025. 3 regimes, 3 sets of weapons, 3 separate survival strategies, all feeding into one another. And Israel, with American air power behind it, is right now attempting to sever those connections at their root inside Iranian territory. That is what this war is really about. And the United States, in the middle of all of it, has already made a mistake that cost this country millions of dollars worth of aircraft and nearly cost 6 American pilots their lives. Let that sink in before we go any further. Now let's walk through this carefully, because the details matter and the connections run deeper than you may have been told. The story starts not in February of 2026, but years before, in the slow, patient construction of what analysts began calling the axis of upheaval. Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea have exploited trade, technology, and diplomacy to undermine US influence and disrupt the global order, though long-standing cracks in their relationships reveal the limits of their transactional partnerships. Now, the word transactional is important here, because it tells you something crucial about the nature of these alliances. These are not friendships, these are not ideological brotherhoods, these are deals. And deals, as history has shown us, hold only as long as the benefit outweighs the cost. Russia was supplying Iran with advanced weapon systems. Israeli forces had already demonstrated this when they successfully destroyed Iran's advanced radar for its Russian-made S-300 air defense system at a site deep inside Iranian territory. That operation, carried out during the 12-day war of June 2025, was a preview, a technical and psychological message sent to everyone watching. Israel was not just hitting missiles, Israel was hitting the Russian fingerprints on Iranian military infrastructure, and now in this second far larger conflict that began on February 28, 2026, those strikes have gone exponentially deeper. 4 of Iran's key ballistic missile manufacturing locations and at least 29 ballistic missile launch sites have been damaged in the first 4 weeks of the US-Israeli offensive, undermining Iran's central military strategy. What you have to understand is that those manufacturing sites, those tunnels, those underground compounds, those missile cities, they were not built by Iran alone. They were built with Russian expertise, North Korean designs, and Chinese economic insulation. North Korea has shipped millions of artillery rounds and dozens of ballistic missiles to Russia, and Iran continues to provide Russia armed unmanned aerial vehicles, all being used against Ukrainian forces. In return, Russia has been expanding its sharing of space, nuclear, and missile-applicable technology to China, Iran, and North Korea. This is the engine of the Axis. Everyone feeds everyone. It is a circular weapons economy built on mutual survival and shared hostility toward American power. So when Israel targets those missile cities, they are not just degrading Iran's capability, they are degrading Russia's return on investment, they are degrading North Korea's export market, they are exposing the hollowness of these so-called partnerships. And the question that hangs over all of it, the question that Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang is asking right now, the question that military planners in Moscow are quietly debating, is this: if Russia could not protect Iran, what does that mean for the next country in this chain? Let us talk about Russia's role here, because it reveals something that the Western press has been extraordinarily reluctant to say plainly. Despite Iran's entry into a 20-year strategic partnership treaty with Russia, signed in January 2025, Tehran could not count on Moscow to go beyond rhetorical support in its clash with Israel and the US. Russia and China called for a ceasefire and de-escalation and later voiced strong condemnations of the US, but did not provide effective military support. Think about what that means in practice. Iran was burning. Iranian cities were being struck. Missile sites were being dismantled from the air. The supreme leader himself was killed on day 1 of the operation. And Russia watched. Russia issued statements. Russia called it a violation of international law and then went back to worrying about Ukraine. The reason for that tells you everything about the limits of authoritarian solidarity. Russia has very different partners in the Middle East. Israel and Russia maintained a close relationship, as did Saudi Arabia and Russia, and that also prevents Russia from going full scale in assisting Iran. Russia is playing multiple tables simultaneously. It cannot afford to burn its relationship with Israel, a country that for years maintained a careful balance with Moscow over Syrian airspace, over Jewish emigration, over energy markets, and Russia, already stretched thin in Ukraine after years of grinding attrition, simply does not have the capacity to open another front, even a proxy one. But here is what makes the North Korean dimension particularly fascinating and frankly alarming. Russia's reluctance to provide any overt support to Iran has raised serious questions about the reliability of the Russia-North Korea partnership. While the two treaties have different terms, North Korea's treaty contained a formal defense commitment, while Iran's only provided for non-aggression and consultation. Pyongyang is nonetheless watching how Moscow behaves when an ally comes under fire. Kim Jong-un is a calculating man. He does not make emotional decisions. He makes actuarial ones. And right now, his actuarial table is telling him something uncomfortable. That the Russian defense umbrella, the very umbrella he has been banking his strategic survival on, may be made of paper. That is the signal Israel is sending, whether it fully intends to or not. Every missile site it destroys in Iran is also a message to Pyongyang. Every time Russia fails to materially defend its treaty partner, the credibility of the whole Eastern counterbalance diminishes. And that creates a vacuum of calculation inside the North Korean leadership that no one in Washington has publicly addressed, which is itself a strategic failure. Now let us come to the American mistake, because it matters enormously, not just as a military event, but as a symbol of the compounding complexity this administration walked into. 3 U.S. F-15E Strike Eagles flying in support of Operation Epic Fury were shot down by Kuwait's air defenses in what U.S. Central Command described as an apparent friendly fire incident. Kuwait acknowledged the incident and all 6 crew members ejected safely. 3 aircraft, tens of millions of dollars each. Shot down not by the enemy, but by an ally. The total cost for a full combat-ready F-15, including advanced systems, can ultimately reach as much as $117 million per aircraft. You think about that. In the fog of an active combat environment, with Iranian aircraft, ballistic missiles, and drones filling the skies over Kuwait simultaneously, the coordination between American and Kuwaiti air defense systems broke down completely. During active combat that included attacks from Iranian aircraft, ballistic missiles, and drones, the U.S. Air Force jets were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defenses. This is not a small thing. This is not something you brush past with a press statement about an ongoing investigation. This is what operational complexity looks like when you start a war without fully stress testing the integration of your coalition's command and control systems. And it raises a question that very few people in the media are asking clearly enough. If this is what the mistakes look like in week 1, what happens in week 4 or week 8, or when Iran's remaining missile forces are concentrated into fewer, more desperate strikes? And there is a deeper problem still. In 2025, the U.S. expended more than a quarter of its entire THAAD air defense munition stockpiles. The more the U.S. fires, the less munitions it has, offensive and defensive, including available for its war plans against China in the Taiwan Strait, against North Korea on the Korean Peninsula, and against Russia. This is the strategic cost that no television anchor is putting on the chyron. Every interceptor fired over Kuwait, every Patriot battery reloaded, every THAAD round expended, that is inventory drawn down against future contingencies, against Taiwan, against the Korean Peninsula, against scenarios that may emerge from this very conflict's second and third order effects. The administration went into this believing, apparently, that the June 2025 12-day war had set a template. That template, quick, precise, devastating, limited in duration, was indeed a remarkable military achievement. Trump, buoyed by the tactical successes of the June 2025 war and the raid-grabbing Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro, believed that this war would follow a similar pattern of limited duration and costs, but Iran did not cooperate with that template. Iran's response did not conform to Trump's plans. The Islamic Republic closed ranks, elevated Khamenei's son Mojtaba, a hardliner, as the new supreme leader, and settled in for what it believes can be a campaign of attrition where it holds, if not a winning hand, at least not a losing one. That is the fundamental strategic miscalculation that deserves honest examination. The administration saw the opening of this conflict as a terminating event. You strike, they capitulate, regime falls, new chapter begins. But what they are encountering is an institution, a revolutionary government, that has spent 47 years preparing psychologically and doctrinally for exactly this scenario. They have war-gamed American air dominance. They have planned for the loss of their supreme leader. They have distributed their military command structure specifically to survive decapitation strikes. And they have one remaining strategic lever that is genuinely dangerous: the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has tried to sow chaos in the region through attacks on US partners in the Gulf and squeezing the global economy by effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz. And this is where Russia and North Korea re-enter the calculation, not as military saviors of Iran, but as beneficiaries of the chaos Iran is creating. Every week the strait remains choked, every week oil prices climb, every week the global economy absorbs the shock of this conflict. Russia gains leverage. Russia's oil, which the US temporarily lifted sanctions on just to keep the global market from seizing up completely, becomes indispensable. On March 13th, to help deal with the economic costs of the war, the US temporarily lifted restrictions on the sale of Russian oil. Think about the bitter irony buried in that sentence. The United States went to war, in part to weaken a Russian partner, and within 2 weeks was forced to lift sanctions on Russia itself to manage the economic fallout. That is the cost-benefit mathematics of interventionism that rarely gets stated plainly. You do not just pay for the bombs, you pay for the second and third order consequences. You pay in munition stockpiles, you pay in friendly fire incidents, you pay in the repositioning of your adversaries who are not the direct target but who benefit from the environment you have created. North Korea watches, China watches, Russia adapts, and each of them is updating their models, their calculations about American endurance, American coalition cohesion, American willingness to absorb costs, when the initial assumptions about duration and resolution turn out to be wrong. Now let us be precise about what Israel is doing within all of this, because Israel's logic here is not America's logic, even if they are flying the same mission together. For Israel, Iran, with a nuclear weapon, is an existential matter, not a threat to be managed, not a deterrent to be balanced. An existential elimination of the strategic margin that has allowed Israel to exist in a hostile neighborhood for decades. Several intelligence agencies suggest Iran has increased enrichment up to 90% as an ultimate measure to deter regime change, raising the prospect of a second Israeli-Iranian military conflict given the effective closure of the diplomatic window. Israel saw that trajectory and concluded, this closes now or it never closes. The 12-day war of 2025 was not enough. Iran was rebuilding, re-enriching, and reconsolidating within months. So Israel came back. And this time, it brought the full weight of American air power with it. The Russia-North Korea connection inside Iran is specifically what Israel is targeting in the deepest sense. Not just the hardware, but the supply chain, the technical knowledge base, the institutional relationships that allow Iran to rebuild what is destroyed. Because if those connections persist after the bombs stop falling, Iran simply starts the reconstruction clock again. The only way to permanently degrade Iranian military capability is to sever the arteries through which that capability is continuously replenished, and those arteries run through Moscow and Pyongyang. This is why analysts who are paying attention are watching not just the bomb damage assessments coming out of Tehran, but the signaling happening in Pyongyang and Moscow right now. It took more than 24 hours for North Korea to issue a statement on Iran, indicating the Kim regime took time to assess the situation, likely querying Iranian diplomats in Pyongyang and observing what Beijing and the Kremlin had to say before moving with its own statement. That pause is telling. That is a government recalculating. That is a leadership watching its regional partner absorb devastating strikes while its most powerful treaty partner, Russia, does nothing militarily to stop it. What we are witnessing, if you step back from the daily strike counts and the casualty figures and the political statements, is the stress testing of the entire post-2022 geopolitical architecture. The architecture that said Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea could form a durable enough counterweight to American power to protect each of its members. That architecture is showing cracks. Iran's weakening at the hands of Israel's military has highlighted the limits of its alliance with China and Russia. Russia and China have both been reluctant to provide effective military support for Iran. Iran took the blow. Its partners issued statements. The gap between what the partnership promised and what it delivered, that gap is now visible to every government on earth that was considering sheltering under the Eastern umbrella. The question going forward, the question that should be driving strategic thinking in Washington right now, is whether the United States is managing this moment with enough clarity and long-range vision to actually capitalize on it. Because breaking the Russia-North Korea-Iran supply chain is a genuine strategic opportunity. But doing so while depleting your own munitions stockpiles, while losing aircraft to friendly fire, while lifting Russian oil sanctions within 2 weeks of starting the conflict, that is not the behavior of a power that has a coherent theory of the outcome. That looks more like improvisation conducted at altitude, with hope functioning as a substitute for strategy. And that ultimately is the American mistake that matters most, not the 3 F-15s lost over Kuwait, as painful and costly as that was. The deeper mistake is entering a conflict of this magnitude and complexity without a fully developed plan for the morning after, for the week after, for the question of what Iran looks like when the bombs stop falling and who fills the power vacuum, and whether the Russia-North Korea supply chain simply waits out the war and reconnects the moment the dust settles. Israel has a plan. Israel's plan is survival. America needs more than survival. America needs a vision for what the regional order looks like on the other side of this. And right now, that vision has not been clearly articulated to the American people, to American allies, or apparently to the allies who are shooting down American jets.